The NHL European Media Tour has passed, and now we have the NHL Media Tour in Las Vegas. On today's show, we are getting one step closer to hockey now that everybody is coming back together to prepare for a new season.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, September 13th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News, and you can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get their daily Florida Panthers fix. And today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. So, Florida Panther fans, still no official date for the start of training camp nor media day, but it'll be less than 5 days out when the end of Rookie Showcase will be. We will be talking more about Rookie Showcase later in the week, as we are hoping to bring in a special guest to the show to discuss Rookie Showcase. But it is a Wednesday, which means it is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. Jacob Winans is back here. And Jacob, welcome back to Locked On Panthers, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Before I say anything about anything, I want to make sure I take a couple minutes here to just publicly congratulate you on the move to the Hockey News. That's huge. Nobody more deserving. So just publicly want to congratulate you on that. Super, super proud, and it's awesome to see you make that transition. So very happy for you.
Yep, and thank you so much, my friend. And the podcast is not going anywhere. We are doing this in addition to the show, and very thankful for. In actuality, he is my boss, but I more see him as a coach, mentor, and friend in David Dork, and as well as Aaron Brown of the Hockey News as well. And very thankful for their mentorship, and like I said, some of the best moments that I had covering the Stanley Cup final was sitting next to those two, along with Roy Bellamy, covering games 3 and 4 of the Stanley Cup final. So I want to thank you as well. You and Nick are also a big part of that, and all the various guests that come here for the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. So very excited for what's coming ahead. But we are at that point where, like I said at the top, Jacob, the guys are getting together, some informal skates. I mean, the day after the Sam Reinhart threw out the first pitch at the Marlins game, there was a video that surfaced of him and Anton Lundell at the ice den practicing and skating. So a lot of informal skates going on now. But also the NHL Media Tour a few weeks ago went to Stockholm, Sweden. And the only quote that we knew from Aleksander Barkov was the whole face-off percentage of Patrice Bergeron. We hadn't heard anything else other than last Friday, when he went on the 32 Thoughts podcast and really spoke about the playoff run, some of the best moments. He didn't really necessarily name one thing, but also spoke really about the breakaway as well from Brad Marchand in Game 5. And one thing that he spoke about was he had all the confidence in the world in Sergei Bobrovsky making that save, especially with the time left on the clock, that Brad Marchand didn't have that opportunity to deke Sergei Bobrovsky, and he shot it from just not just around the hash marks and all that stuff. Needs to see replay one more time to confirm that. But just when you heard that interview with him, Elliot Freeman, and Jeff Merrick, what were your thoughts on what Barkov had to say about the playoff run?
I personally, I think he there's just a sense of maturity now that I think is starting to click for the captain. I think the playoff run in general, I think as it went on, we saw the first half of the playoffs really wanting more, especially offensively from Barkov. It didn't feel like he was out there really dominating games, and then just as the playoffs evolved, I think he grew into that role a lot, especially in the Carolina series. There were multiple times where Panthers are struggling offensively. It's a defensive battle, trailing by a goal, and you need something. And it was the captain who provided it. It was Barkov who came through. You think of the huge goal against the Hurricanes, the Antti Ranta goal, where he fakes between the legs, beats him backhand. I mean, that's just an impossible move to pull off under the best circumstances. In regular season, preseason is where you think you would try something like that, and he did it in the playoffs, down by a goal in the Eastern Conference Finals. It's a level of confidence that I don't think we've seen from Barkov in years past, and I think finally having that deep playoff run has allowed him to grow into a sense of maturity and leadership. And I think some of that is also Matthew Tkachuk as a teammate really takes a lot of that pressure off of him, where he doesn't have to be as much of the vocal leader. He can really lead by example. And I think he's really growing into the role of captain. It's taken some time, but I think he's really developed into it. And I think what you're seeing and what you're hearing is really just an evolution in the sense of maturity in Barkov's game, which is great to see because we've had him here since he was 17, 18 years old. It's pretty wild to see how he's grown, but it's definitely there. And I think the playoff run had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and you're talking about a guy who had 5 points in that Carolina series when it was all said and done in that one, and then the fact that the puck was behind him lifts his leg up as well while faking the between the legs and going and beating Antti Ranta. That was in Game 2 of the Eastern Conference Final, and then just even though one thing that I remember we were discussing with Barkov was just the points weren't necessarily there for the Toronto series as well, especially towards the back end of the series. But you saw how he was winning those important draws on the back check as well for the captain. You talk 200-foot game. It's definitely something that was there for Aleksander Barkov. And also he spoke about how Paul Maurice emphasized that they weren't a team that were double-digit points down as well. And here's another thing as well. He, along with other guys, still would not say what was said on that night in Toronto in late March as well. I wonder if we'll ever know the full extent of that conversation outside of the little bit of lip reading that we saw. You guys are playing like little wussies, just a clean version of that as well. Also mentioned the 4 or 5 guys who wouldn't have played if it were a regular season game, and specifically spoke about outside of the Ekblads and the Montours, Gudis as well. We know he was dealing with a high ankle sprain as well, and especially how dangerous that hit was from Ivan Barbashev, and I believe it was Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final as well. And another thing was you spoke about the leadership as well, and not overstepping certain boundaries when it comes to certain moves as well. He himself says, "Yeah, I like that guy," but he knows not to overstep that guy and say, "Oh, I want this person over this." He knows that there's a salary cap. He knows that there's actually trust in Bill Zito based on what he's done over the last few years, getting them to a position, regardless of whether it's depleted the Panthers farm or not. You have also seen the maturity in him in that part of it too, that there is a good line of communication between him, coach, and GM.
Yeah, and I think that's huge. I think to touch on the quote first about during the playoffs, the guys who were really battling to even be in the lineup. I think that's really inspiring. He mentioned that before games, there was a line out the door, players getting treatment in order to play. And I think that goes a long way in building your team and building trust in each other. I think there's a team chemistry there now that even though some guys are gone from last year's team, some very key players, I think I think this is a team that's mostly staying together, and they've seen what everyone is willing to do uh, to reach that ultimate goal, and I think that's inspiring going forward. Um, but the streamlined communication between captain, head coach, and GM, I think the Panthers have really nailed that. I think at times teams can be a little bit over reliant on trying to appease a star, try to get a star player everything they ask for, even if they don't feel it's best for roster construction. They feel it's best for appeasing their star and keeping them happy. And I think Barkov is the exact type of guy that does not require that. Uh, for lack of a better term, he's low maintenance as a superstar. He doesn't he's not asking for much. He's putting his trust in the GM. His belief is the GM is able to build this team. They know how to do that, and I know how to do what I do on the ice. And um, I think that's important. You have to allow your GM and your head coach room to breathe and room to execute their vision, and you have to trust that their vision is going to be a successful one as long as you do your part. And I think Sasha Barkov is great when it comes to that. I think um, his opinion, of course, is valued, and I'm sure he's consulted when it's important to be consulted. But it's also not a situation where our captain is providing a wish list to the GM and expecting the GM to go and check off as many boxes on that wish list every offseason just to make Barkov happy. That's not the best way to build a roster, and a lot of teams struggle with that. There are some superstar players who require to be catered to a little bit, and I think we're in a fortunate position where we don't have a captain who really sees it that way.
Yeah, and you can only imagine the first GM I thought of was Ken Holland out in Edmonton. Even
Yep.
though this is maybe his last year there, maybe and the pressure that comes with Edmonton and trying to win, and the possibility of McDavid resigning or not, and also Draisaitl as well as their contracts are coming up as well. So you think about Edmonton, and then you think of a position that the Florida Panthers are in, like you said, low maintenance superstar when it comes to Aleksander Barkov, and just taking that step back when necessary, and being and sometimes being a leader is just not necessarily staying quiet, but just knowing and walking the walk, and that's something that Barkov uh, has done basically since the day he arrived here back in 2013. But we're gonna go from the European media tour, that interview that Alexander Barkov had back a few weeks ago, and we're going to be discussing the current NHL media tour that is currently going on in Las Vegas. We are going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we are going to tell you all about Jace Medical. And the Jace case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jace case is to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, jump on a quick call with one of our board certified physicians. Get ongoing care from our physicians on any treatment related questions. Doctor created, doctor recommended. Don't be caught unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jace handles everything from online evaluations to licensed pharmacy medications, delivery, and ongoing consultation and care. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. And that's Jace, JASE medical.com. Segment number 2 here on this Wednesday, September 13th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It's another edition of Winans Wednesday. Jacob Winans is here. And Jacob, like we said, media tour, one step closer to hockey. Matthew Tkachuk is the lone representative for the Florida Panthers at the NHL Media Tour in Las Vegas. Nothing has come out as far as interviews, as far as what I've seen, but we have seen pictures resurface of the likes of Connor Bedard with Sidney Crosby. That's one picture that I saw, and that's going to be opening night for the NHL. And very, very excited to watch that one, as the Florida Panthers will be waiting a few days before taking the ice, as there will be a triple header on the Tuesday, and then the Florida Panthers will get their first game going on the Thursday on the road against the Minnesota Wild. So just a big slate of games to start. But Matthew Tkachuk is there. He had a post from the Florida Panthers social media account saying he can't wait to be back in front of the fans. And I I wanted to have a little bit of a fun exercise with you, Jacob, and I wanted to ask you, if you were in front of Matthew Tkachuk, based on the summer and coming off a Stanley Cup final, what were some of the questions that you would want to ask Matthew Tkachuk?
Yeah, so there's a few. Some are like real legitimate questions. I guess you would call it, and some of them are just questions that, as Matthew Tkachuk, the personality he is, I think would just be fun to ask him. So the one of them that I thought would have been really interesting to ask would be, of all his like clutch goals, big goals in the playoffs, big wins, what was the most satisfying? Like I'm really curious to know, like a guy like Matthew Tkachuk was put in that position so many times during the playoffs, and he just continued to deliver. I just want to know which one like really felt the best, like which goal like put him over the top and was like, wow, I just did that. It's kind of interesting to think about, like being in his shoes in that situation. So that's one I would definitely ask him. I would. The playoffs are so intense, so chippy and back and forth. I would also want to know, like the teams they played against, who was really like the most annoying, or the biggest trash talker or whatever. I'd be really interested to hear some of these playoff stories, because he was such a villain throughout the playoffs. Just every team they played against, every night he was a targeted person, and I just want to know who really got under his skin, and who kind of pushed his buttons there. But then I'd also want to ask, over the summer, what, after a season like he just had, what do you work on? Like what does he feel is missing from his game after a season where he checked so many boxes? It's crazy to think about, but the best players in the league, the Matthew Tkachuks, the Connor McDavids, the Leon Draisaitl's, those guys, like when you get to the offseason and you put up historic numbers, record-breaking numbers, what do you do in the offseason to get better? I would think it gets harder and harder every year to find holes that need to be filled in your game. I think it gets more challenging to improve, but the best players are not satisfied with maintaining or regressing. All of those best players want to improve, and I'd love to know what Matthew Tkachuk thinks is an area of improvement in his game that he thinks he has room to grow and room to be better next season than he was last season, because last season was just phenomenal across the board. There's really nothing bad you can say about his game last season. So I want to know what there is that he thinks is lacking.
Yeah, and the fact that he couldn't do upper body work for a while based on the broken sternum, obviously I want to ask him how that is feeling, and I'm assuming he's better based on everything from the end of the season, saying that this is something that would recover and he'll be ready for training camp as well. But I could also see how whenever your game is so polished as his, doing some of the same drills over the summer can possibly be boring, honestly, if we're being honest, and you just want to get back to hockey, but you know
Mm-hmm.
that some of the fundamentals you need in order to be great on your edges as well, and doing some of the stick handling. It's like baseball players. What do a lot of baseball players still do? They hit off the tee still, even as professionals. So that's something along with hockey as well when it comes to that, working on rebound opportunities as well in front of the net. Um, so that's another one that I could possibly see Matthew Tkachuk working on once he was feeling better. Also, one thing I would want to ask him is, the NHL Media Tour happens to be at the place where they lost the Stanley Cup final. I would want to ask him, how does it feel to be back at this place? Is it what are the emotions going through, and what's the feeling of him being unable to finish the series as well? That would be something, and I'm sure knowing how he wears his heart on his sleeve, at least on the ice. Not going to pretend like I know whether he wears his heart on his sleeve off the ice, but just kind of want to know what his emotions were at that when it comes to being there, and what is gonna be the emotion going into next season. Because personally, what I could only see him being playing like a madman last season, based on not finishing and just having kind of an explosion to open the season.
Yeah, I completely I would completely envision that for him. I think if you look at what's coming next season for Kachuk, there's going to be a lot required of him, given that the Panthers are going to be missing, especially some defense. Brandon Montour and Aaron Ekblad both all but confirmed to not be ready to start the season. Montour expected back sometime in November. Ekblad potentially all as far out as January. So with some holes on defense, there's going to be a lot required of forwards defensively to help the defense, to really back check, block shots, protect the goalie. There's going to be a lot required of forwards, and you may have to score a little bit more in the first half of the season, outscore your problems a little bit, which
Yeah.
the Panthers have shown an ability to do. But with that said, there's going to be a lot of responsibility, a lot required of Matthew Tkachuk, especially early in the season. And I think he's the type of guy who's coming out on a revenge tour to start next year. I think he's such a competitor. I would think it's probably ate him alive to not be able to play in that clinching game, not be able to finish the season and see it through. It's no fault of his, but everyone knows an athlete who gets injured and misses a key game, they're always going to think that they could have made the difference. And Matthew Tkachuk, we could have had 5 Matthew Tkachuks in that game, and we weren't winning that game. But that doesn't make it feel any better. And I think he's had an entire summer to think about it, and I think that only means great things for his performance and for the Panthers season, because if anyone's coming out red hot to start the year on a bit of a revenge tour, ready to come out with their hair on fire, I think it's number 19.
No doubt, and very excited to see what he's going to say at Media Day come next week for sure as well. And another few questions that I would ask him: how was his first full summer in Florida, and who was the best dancer at Brady Tkachuk's wedding? That is a personal question I would ask. Just uh just just for just for uh just for laughs and all that stuff as well, because it was a very eventful summer off the ice, especially for them. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where a former Panthers coach is in the news, and we are going to discuss whether we see this person possibly in the NHL again, and some of the issues from this meeting. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Wednesday, September 13th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So, Jacob, our friend David Dwork posted an article discussing some of the coaches and GMs meetings that happened in Chicago a few days ago, and there were two people who happened to be invited to that meeting, and according to Commissioner Gary Bettman, it was voluntary and giving them an opportunity to speak to the coaches and GMs. And those two people are former Florida Panthers head coach Joel Quenneville and GM Bowman, former GM of the Chicago Blackhawks. And I, it's funny because I never actually mentioned this publicly until now. When I went to go cover the Panthers in Tampa on February 28th, a few seats down were Stan Bowman and Scotty Bowman there in the same location as me, and it was a little. I was thinking they might not be working in the NHL, but they're allowed in the press box, which scratching my head a little bit there for not Scotty Bowman, but Stan Bowman. I was scratching my head on that one, but they were they were in a meeting room at Chicago O'Hare Airport to address the GMs and coaches about their experience. But Jacob, I know the purpose of it was to maybe ask for forgiveness, as we don't know what was discussed about, and talk about their experiences. But my problem with this is, why is it addressed in this setting behind closed doors versus publicly? To and when it comes to something like what happened with with everything that happened with Bradley Aldrich and Kyle Beach back in 2010 with the Chicago Blackhawks. And I have a huge issue with this as far as the lack of accountability for people, especially now with what we heard today on September 20th about what Mike Babcock allegedly has did to Boone Jenner, as far as asking for photos of his phone and airplaying it as well, and everything that Mike Babcock did in Toronto about calling out other players. And then this with this meeting, nothing confirmed about whether they're reinstated. Is like, oh, if they have interest in working for the NHL, if they go to that meeting, they're interested in being in the league again. So uh, I don't know why Gary Bettman was also dancing around that, but that's the lawyer in him. So what were your thoughts when you first heard about this story about former Florida Panthers head coach Joel Quenneville, along with former Chicago Blackhawks GM Stan Bowman?
My issue with it is the same issue that you have, and I think it's the fact that any step in this process, the entire thing needs to be completely transparent and it needs to be completely public. And the reason for that is I don't understand. I don't really see what good you're doing having the first step to some potential reconciliation being behind closed doors in an airport. Uh, the problem was not, it wasn't broken trust or a violation of the brotherhood of GMs and coaches. That's not who Joel Quenneville and Stan Bowman wronged. It's not, they didn't, it's almost like they're apologizing to the wrong crowd when you're going behind closed doors and having a meeting with GMs and coaches and asking for their forgiveness. That's not who you need to be asking for forgiveness from. That's not who you need to be trying to build trust with again. Those aren't the people that were affected by your actions or inactions. And I think that's where I'm having an issue with it, because if you're trying to take steps to get back into the league, and you're trying to, and you truly have done the work and made strides in understanding what happened then and how to make sure it never happens again, and you understand what you did wrong, and you're trying to repent for that and get some sort of forgiveness or repair the decimated, completely shattered trust between coach, GM, and players, fans, the hockey community in general. This is not the crowd that you're trying to get back in good graces with, and this is not the crowd that you need to be proving your growth with. You need to be proving that to a lot of different people that are not the suits that you're meeting with in the airport in Chicago. And I think that's my biggest problem with that. And then Gary Bettman, of course, he's treading super carefully in everything he's saying as far as this goes, which it's to be expected. That's the commissioner of the league, and he's trying to make it look good. But it's hard to do that when you're doing it wrong from the jump. If this is step one to making things better and finding your way back in, you've already messed it up. And Gary Bettman has not helped. If anything, he's making it harder for them, and he's making it harder on himself, because this is such a delicate situation. And if they truly are putting in the work and trying to get back into an NHL role, every little thing has to be done perfectly right to make that a reality. And they've already massively missed the mark on step one, which gives me zero confidence that they're going to hit the mark on any step after this. I don't see how it's tough to imagine how this goes forward without just completely enraging everyone, and no one's going to believe that anything substantial was done, because there's no trust there, and they're further breaking it by doing these closed door meetings and things. It's disingenuous to me, especially with the Mike Babcock stuff, and I'll address that too. But I think now, obviously, that story comes from the Spit and Chicklets podcast, which, it's not exactly the most reliable source all the time, and they can be a little bit theatrical and outlandish, but it's Mike Babcock we're talking about. And as ridiculous and borderline stupid as Paul Bissonnette is, I don't think he's a liar, and especially when it comes to this kind of stuff. I think he may over exaggerate things, may play up the drama sometimes, but I don't think he's flat out lying. And what we're hearing about is definitely something that's right up Mike Babcock's alley, something he would absolutely do. And I think the statement the Blue Jackets put out didn't exactly deny it. It just said it was mischaracterized. So, it's neither side is a side that I want to put all my eggs in that basket. But I'm more inclined to believe that Mike Babcock did cross a line again. And if it's not completely wrong and just messed up, honestly, it's just weird. I don't understand the reason for it. It's just strange. You can, if you take out all the even if you remove his past and the things he's done as a coach, the abuse, it still comes across as just really, really weird and just an invasion of privacy. And I don't know. There's just a lot we could talk about. We could have 10 episodes just about hockey culture and the revolving door, the carousel of head coaches. And it's getting frustrating and it's tiresome, because we need to move past this if we're going to grow the game.
No doubt. And yeah. And there is a little bit of language that I would not repeat from Biz Nasty after everything that he put out, but he does have a relationship with players that we can't deny that.
Right.
When it comes to people talk, when it comes to that. And I don't know how long he was holding that before he put it out publicly as well. But going back to the whole Joel Quenneville and Stan Bowman, it's not necessarily that I don't think he should ever coach again, but if he does, there needs to be a proper step one in order for that to happen, and an order of operations in order to gain that trust. And so far, like you said, step one has already been messed up. And it starts with the commissioner. That's really what it. And you're not going to put cameras in front of Joel Quenneville as well. We're kind of not allowed to at this point, as far as him speaking publicly, because he's not reinstated by the NHL and not put in a media setting. So we won't know his thoughts until that happens. But the example, or the lack of, that Gary Bettman is conducting, that is ultimately where the responsibility holds when it comes to getting to this point, and for Joel Quenneville to be trying to get back into the game, and with Stan Bowman as well. So hopefully this is, we could only be hopeful that the change can come as far as changing the culture, as far as just treating people with respect and all that stuff. But as far as the recycled head coaches that we've seen over the last few decades of the same ones, just in different places, then yeah, I don't the best way of the best way to indicate current behavior is past behavior, and that's basically, and after a certain point when someone has lived 50 plus years of their lives and all that stuff, being conditioned to behave a certain way, can you really expect them to fully change? Some can, and some don't want to, and in the instance of Mike Babcock, we that being out, just says that. But Jacob, we went on a long rant about this conversation, but something that really had to be talked about. So I want to say thank you so much for joining me on this conversation, talking about all this, and of course, once again, joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And tell everybody where they can follow you online.
For sure, you can follow me on X at Jacob Winans 8. And we're almost there, guys. We're so close. Just a couple weeks until preseason hockey. We are right at the door.
Awesome, Jacob. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week, my friend.
Awesome. I will be here.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steer Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And every day is make sure you come back for Friday's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where we are going to be previewing the Florida Panthers rookie showcase. Who are the guys to look for? Who are the guys to hopefully take that next step in not only making the opening night roster, but a leg up in next year's training camp as well. So every day is make sure you come back for Friday's edition of the show. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're to our team every day.